being an identity forward Asian American leader within the business lines that you're in, how has that impacted your companies, your industries, and potentially even perceived stereotypes that come with being an Asian American in the workplace today? So, Michelle, why don't you kick that off? Would love to kind of hear about your experiences at Bestwell and beyond.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Peter, for putting this together. I think it's so important that we continue to spotlight leaders and show that Asian Americans are in leadership roles and in different paths and different segments as well. So it's a really interesting question. So again, Michelle Tran, I lead our strategic partnerships and enterprise team at Bestwell. We are in the retirement industry. We're in financial services. So as you can imagine, an Asian female, and you can't see me, but I'm short, in financial services is not super common. I can name the Asian female sales leaders in retirement on one hand. Actually, not even one hand. I can name, there are three of us. So it really does have a huge impact on the way that we operate as a business, the way that, kind of the industry operates in general. And there's a lot that's changing that, right? We're really trying to diversify the industries, but it takes time, right? And, I'll say it like when we're at conferences and a lot of my counterparts, they tend to be, 6'2", white, and they all play golf. And, there's a certain make, and that's changing over time. But really what that has forced me to do is have a louder voice within our industry and beyond, and making sure that visibility is there for me as a female, for me as an Asian leader, in particular because of my industry is used to seeing, kind of one type of person. And I've been in financial services my entire career. And the reason why I did start NYC Fintech Woman was really to change that female narrative within fintech, is to bring females together so we can change the industry, so we can have more females in pure leadership seats, C-suites, board seats, getting them, moving them up, making sure they're paid more. And I think there's a lot of effort that we need to do just from an Asian American perspective as well.
Appreciate that. Thanks for that, Michelle. And I know you said you could only count 3 Asian leaders, but I'm sure there's another generation of Asian folks, who are coming after you as well. So can you talk a little bit about that at Bestwell? Do you see kind of the next generation willing to stay, within their roles because they see folks like you who are speaking up and, who are potentially providing mentorship?
100%. And to clarify, the 3 is 3 Asian female leaders.
Got it. Yep.
So there are males as well, but the 3 Asian female leaders in senior leadership roles at kind of, the bigger firms. And I definitely see that changing from a pipeline perspective when we do go out to recruit, that we show that, look, this is a really interesting business path. I think Bestwell itself is a later stage startup, but in the mind of some folks, it's still kind of in that startup realm. And so startups tend to be riskier, right? And so it's really helped to say, okay, Asians tend to go into more kind of prescribed roles, right? I started off in a prescribed role in finance and financial services. I worked for the largest asset manager, BlackRock, very stable, great name. And I think the fact that, look, I'm in my role and I've been able to do my role really well as an Asian, that has created a lot of openings for other folks to say, okay, look, I can do this too. There are people that look like me, and I do want to be, and I want to be in sales, or I want to go down this path. I want to explore this company. And so we actually, that's something that we track very specifically at Bestwell as well. Like, who's applying, what are the demographics, who takes on the roles. And we're doing a lot of effort to really reach out, making sure our pipeline is very diverse.
Love that. Yeah, I wish I had more Asian representation in leadership in my mentors. Like you said, for me, it was a 6'2" golf club toting person who was leading teams. And, it's quite difficult to imagine myself in like a C-suite or VP level position as a salesperson. So thanks for sharing that, Michelle. Peter, how about you? You're a real estate agent. You're quite successful. I don't know what the market is like in Florida with regards to agents that look like you, what your team looks like, but can you talk about your identity and how that shows up in what you do day to day? Peter, do we have you? I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, you guys. Had some technical
There we
difficulties.
go.
Yes. All
All
right.
good. Got you. Loud and clear.
Yep. So can you repeat the question real quick for me, Peter? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just curious, how it looks for you as a Vietnamese real estate agent. I know you wear that with pride. You lead the Vietnamese National Association of Real Estate Professionals as well. So can you talk about kind of the intersection of identity, your role, and kind of what that looks like in Florida, with the success that you've had?
So, normally my client base is not Asian at all. My client base, I would probably say, is like 95% Caucasian Americans. And until probably about 2 years ago, I didn't realize the talent and the ability I had to influence the Asian community, especially the Vietnamese community. We have a very large Vietnamese community in Orlando, Florida. And then one of my partners, his name's Fat, invited me to ARIA, right? I've been to their meetings, so it's the Asian Real Estate Association of America. And I didn't realize until I went to their national convention in San Diego about 2 years ago that I'm doing a disservice to my people. There's a lot of, if you guys all know, majority of the time, if you go into a nail salon, they're probably going to be Vietnamese, right? And then they do that because of generation. That's what their mom did. That's what their dad did. That's what their uncle, aunts did. So I know a lot of people that even got college degrees that just stuck with it because it's the safe way to go. Just like me, when I told my dad I was going to give my career in another company, I left there as director of business development, having a safe salary job, bonuses, commission to do real estate full time, which is full commission. He pretty much said, "What are you thinking? Why would you even risk that?" Right? Because our parents want us to be safe, right? It's
Sure.
safe. That's like, I think, the Asian mentality is play it safe, not take big risk. Fortunately for me, 10 years ago in January 2014, I took probably the biggest risk of my life to do real estate full time, and now I'm able to do it successfully. And I do have a lot of Asian agents that look up to me and ask me for help a lot. So I believe that God has blessed me abundantly in this sphere of real estate, and people do look up to me and ask me a lot of help. Does that answer the question?
That's great. No, that's super helpful. Yeah, that's really fascinating that you said 95% Caucasian. I
Yeah.
guess not a lot of Asian Super Bowl winners, right, or
Mm-mm.
champions.
No.
So, a question on that. So, have you felt anything? As you were getting into the industry, did you feel like race, your background, played a part in how your clientele viewed you or treated you? Like, did that show up? And was there kind of a turning point where you said, you know what, like now I'm going to live fully identity forward as a Vietnamese real estate agent, regardless of kind of what the stereotypes or repercussions were? Just curious, like how that experience was for you.
I guess for me, fortunately, I was blessed in a way where I never felt that. I mean, I consider myself more American than Asian, or American
Sure.
Asian, right? American Vietnamese, to tell you the truth, right? Because I've spent majority of my life in the States. I
Sure.
wasn't born here, like I said earlier. I was born in a Malaysian refugee camp, but I've always identified myself as work with as an American. My wife's American, Caucasian. My boys, 2 boys, 7 and 9, they just look Caucasian versions of me, to be honest with you. So even
Sure.
at that point, right, my whole identity around that is more American than anything else. So I've been blessed enough that I haven't faced discrimination.
That's great.
Anyway.
Yeah. And you could share that experience, like you said, with your community, right? Where they can also see the hope and optimism of having a successful career, even if their clientele doesn't look exactly like them, right? So I appreciate you sharing that. Jack, how about you? Would love to get your thoughts on identity. Obviously, it's a big part of a lot of what you do. I mentioned you work with Andrew Yang. You are on the board of the Tony Hsieh Award. You also organized the largest rally, which I'm curious to get like how big that was and what that was like. But how is identity playing into your role right now? And even prior at Meta, like how has it showed up with you, whether it's positive or negative?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here and allowing me to speak and share. I think these spaces are very important. I think elevating and highlighting the incredible work that Asian people are doing in this country, around the world, is much needed. Um, Asians in New York count for about 10% of the population, but are drive a significant impact economically. Um, Also, one of the highest tax paying groups. Me personally, I feel responsible as an Asian American who has grown up in Brooklyn, New York, and experience different races and different ethnicities and different cultures to bring Asians to the forefront. So that's a lot of the work that I do. When I opened restaurants, I realized using culture to build bridges was kind of the form, the way I was building culture, right, without actually communicating. And then as I developed more of my communicative skills and being able to shine lights towards different parts of our ethnicities, I felt like that was my responsibility now instead of restaurants, because someone else can handle that aspect and do a better job than me. My first restaurant I opened in Union Square. We were the 11th highest grossing restaurant on Square.
Wow.
Majority of our employees were Asians from the local colleges, NYU, Baruch. And when COVID happened, we were one of the first businesses to experience loss, not because of COVID, but because our staff was Asian.
Wow.
A lot of people weren't coming to our stores. So that was something that I realized. It was like my first business loss, closing a multi-million-dollar restaurant chain in Union Square, and realizing a lot of it had to do with being Asian and not the pandemic. And then obviously going to work at Meta on the Instagram team and being a startup advisor and being the person that goes out and speaks to the small businesses when there's a new product being released and teaching them how to run the ad for the product and what ads to run. And being that face for Meta was important for me because I didn't feel like I had that upbringing. I wasn't the Silicon Valley kid. I didn't know how to code. And now obviously working with Andrew Yang and collaborating with him and just kind of being his ambassador has been a really cool experience. What I learned most from it is like what it's like to be an authentic Asian American leader and how it's possible to be that in today's world. And Tony Hsieh, right? I'm on the board of the Tony Hsieh Awards. He was one of the first Asian American founders to sell his company for $1 billion. Mm-hmm. And then obviously towards the end of his life, he was going through all these issues. So it is important for me to remember him, to share his story, to tell the world about his beliefs and how much impact he created, not only in the startup world, but on Las Vegas itself. Like if you ever go to downtown Las Vegas, you see this massive change in the economy, and that was really due to him.
That's amazing. Yeah, appreciate you sharing all that. You've had such a diverse set of experiences. Tell me a little bit more about that rally, the Stop Asian Hate rally that you put together. How did that come about? Was that kind of at the heels of you closing your restaurant? Was that before, after? Kind of where was the kind of time placement of that? Because the other thing I'd love to talk to you about is you now proudly show up as an Asian American leader, but I'm sure at the time when your restaurant was closing, that was tough, right? So
very tough.
You kind of go through that time period and the rally a little bit.
Yeah. So I as soon as the pandemic started in March, I closed down all my restaurants because they were in such prime locations. Thankfully, I was already working at Instagram at that time. I had a general manager managing the stores. And when the issues started happening with Asian American violence, I kind of looked around to see who was doing anything that aligned with me that I could support. And it was really no one that felt like I resonated with. There were a lot of traditional nonprofits out there, standing in the front lines, holding up signs, but they just weren't people that I felt like I could stand behind. And as an entrepreneur, I looked through my Rolodex like, oh, who can I onboard to fill this role of an Asian American activist? And I scrolled all the way down to Z, and I'm like, shit, I actually don't know anyone who can do this. And it was like, I just got this like slap in the head from something, was like, hey, you do it. Like, who else is going to do it? And I was like, crap, I don't want to do it. That's a lot of work. I still work at Instagram at this point. I'm like, I don't want to do it. But as the attacks kept on ramping up, I felt some conviction to lead a movement where it wasn't what we saw on TV with the past kind of rallies. It wasn't aggressive. It was more for a place. It was more of of an experience where people came together.
Mm,
It felt like a music festival. People left feeling like they had community, that there was a cathartic release, and then they went to support the local businesses and brought that energy back to their families, right? So I've
wow.
never been to a rally before that, and I've never hosted or spoke in front of more than like 50 people, maybe 100 on Zoom one time. And then here I am in front of 10,000 people, not knowing what to say. Not actually, I don't even know what to do. All I know is like people are in pain and they need to see that people care about them. And we do a few chants and we bring some people up to talk. And we have MC Jin doing his music show. And then we have lion dancing. And it was like, whoa, that was an experience. But the
Wow.
best thing about that, even though I don't know what actually happened, is that weeks after, months after, different Asian Americans from all around the country and the world who were young and like, looked like us, started taking action and making movements in their community. And it was because they saw someone who they resonated with do something, and that gave them permission to do something as well.
Love that. That's super inspiring. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that story. It seems like it was very organic, and I like how you said it wasn't aggressive, right? It
Yeah,
wasn't this like charged event. It was more of a celebration, which
right,
was maybe in a lot of ways closer to our roots and our upbringing,
right.
which is a good thing, I think.
Jack,
Yeah,
thanks for that last point of, hey, what I'm doing is being able to have ripple effects because other people see what I'm doing. So I just
Mhm.
want to say, so I'm launching a platform called Tiger Collective. And partly is because of the last couple of years and seeing you guys come out with Stop Asian Hate and all these other platforms that we just need to showcase more and more Asians. So I want to say, to your point, you're one of the reasons why we are starting Tiger Collective.
Amazing.
So very true.
Yeah.
love that. Love that. Thanks for chiming in on that, Michelle. And Michelle, actually, I want to go back to you because, I think a few months ago I heard this term, the double pane glass ceiling, right? Because, Asian American males, I write about like my plight and trials and tribulations. But when you bring in kind of the gender intersectionality of being an Asian American woman or an Asian woman, things are vastly different, right? And I can't assume to know what that's like. So can you talk about that in terms of how that shows up for you, maybe in like fintech women? I don't know like what the membership looks like, how many Asians are there, what the percentage is, but you're kind of playing two roles, one as a woman leader, but also as an Asian American woman leader.
Yeah. So
And
we
so,
call it
yeah, would
this,
love to
the
hear.
double paned bamboo ceiling.
There you
So
go.
as you know, like gotta throw that bamboo in there. It's harder to break through. Um,
True.
so the glass ceiling, which everyone is very familiar with, right? So women in leadership roles, they have to really break through. And I know it's cliche, but it's still very true, right? Like if I look at a lot of the companies that I've been at, it's still, males dominate kind of the leadership seats and the executive seats to that day. Um, when you throw in the perspective that, look, not only am I female, but I'm also Asian, and there's also perspectives that come with, oh, how does an Asian typically operate? What should we expect from an Asian, right? Then it makes it a little bit harder. There's another layer that you have to break through as an Asian female, and then you got to break through the glass, and so that's what we call it, the double paned bamboo ceiling. Um, and as an Asian leader, let's say there's Asian stereotypes really particular to Asian females, right? You're supposed to be quieter, more docile, more submissive. I joke with my husband all the time. I'm like, look, he's also Caucasian. I'm like, you didn't marry, kind of an Asian woman to be submissive. I am born and bred in the U.S. I'm very vocal. I speak very loud. He's like, yes, I know that. But that's generally the stereotype. And then so you throw that stereotype and you think about, so put that in the context of, okay, who do I typically work with in my world in financial services, right? It's folks who are maybe not in the coastal cities where we're at, not in New York and not in California. They sit in Idaho, they sit in Ohio, and they don't typically interact with Asians. And so they don't get kind of that diverse interaction. So the stereotype permeates for them. And so that's kind of one of the things that we're really trying to do through Tiger Collective and a lot of the platforms that I'm trying to speak more vocally on is to showcase Asian females in different light. because there is that stereotype that we need to break through in order to get to those leadership roles. And there's multiple different layers between being an Asian female versus, being a female versus being an Asian American. And so that it's definitely more difficult. And there's been a lot of studies to show just across the board from an Asian perspective. I think in tech, there's something like there's over like 27% of tech workers are actually Asian. But if you look at the executive level, it drops down to 5%. And that's pretty consistent across other industries as well. Like you look at law, you look at consulting, it's pretty consistent. And so while we tend to be really great up to a certain point, we don't get asked to join those seats. We don't get asked to the table. So how do we make sure we showcase folks to kind of break through those ceilings and then help and mentor others so they can get there?
Yeah, I love that. It seems like there's a lot of educating you're doing, not only with your husband, but likely within Vestfel and the fintech woman space as well. So
Yeah.
appreciate that, Michelle. Peter, I want to shift it over to you. You have coined this term, the Peter Liu experience. And so I'm just curious, what is that like, right? Like, why do you have Super Bowl champions and celebrities coming to you? Because there must be something in that phrasing or the white glove treatment. Maybe it's the blazer you're wearing that helps, right? So can you kind of like describe what that is for you?
So I guess the experience is, well, let's just go to this suit. So 6 days a week, I am in a full suit, sometimes in a 3-piece suit. And if you guys have been to Orlando, Florida, June, July, it's 105, 100 degrees outside with a lot of humidity, right? So what it is, it's always the same system and process of patterns of customer service level. I've always treat every single customer, and it doesn't matter, we're selling a $50,000 condo, $6 million home. They're going to get the Peter Liu experience, which is my team, my admin staff, my marketing team, everybody. I really don't care what's in your bank account, okay? So the best way to state this, the reason why I got into real estate is when me and my wife were looking at homes, I went, and I'm a Florida Gator fan because I graduated from the University of Florida. So it's a Saturday afternoon. I'm in there with flip-flops, shorts, and a tank top that says Florida Gators. We walked in, and the sales consultant in the office was just sitting there. She's on the phone. So I said, okay. She pointed over some paperwork on the side, and just said, grab some paperwork, walk the house. So we go in, we walk the house, we come back down. She didn't, and she's off the phone by the time. She didn't bother getting up. She didn't bother getting my information. She didn't bother anything of seeing that I can afford this house or this townhome that we're in.
Wow.
And that made, I actually, that was the last thing we looked at. I went back home to Melbourne because at the time we were looking at homes in Orlando, and Melbourne's about an hour east. I was mad. I was angry because I felt like I was being treated horribly, discriminated against, and not racially discriminated against, but discriminated against for my financial levels, right? Or whatever her mindset was. And I wasn't even in real estate at this point in time. So I just stopped looking at houses that day. And from that point on, I said I would never, ever want a customer to feel like that. Because the house that we looked at, we ended up signing on a house 2 weeks later that was double the price of that specific home that we even looked at. So, that's the Peter Liu experience. And it's the Peter Liu Signature Group experience because that's my team. I was telling my team, you never know who is from where, from what, but you never judge a book by its cover. And especially in our area. So Lake Nona is really known for golfing. And we are actually the USTA campus headquarters is here as well in Lake Nona. And in Lake Nona Golf and Country Club, we have a lot of famous people. So like Coach Lou Holtz. And there's some names like the Super Bowl champion. I can't tell you who that is because they asked for privacy. But
I was going to ask actually, so I'm glad you.
Yeah, so I can't name that
disclaimer.
person. But you guys know who you heard the name Lou Holtz, Coach Lou Holtz?
Of course, yes.
So I represented selling his home, listing his home, represented him. Boys to Men, have you guys heard of Boys to Men? So Nathan Morris, we did a show on A&E, no, not A&E, one of the shows, but it was Flipping the House. So we broke down a house, a 10,000 square foot home, straight from the slab and rebuilt it. And so Nathan Morris did a show on that as well. So these are the people that I get to meet, but I treat everybody the same. I don't want to say that, some level of service are a little higher because we got to be there daily for the listing or showing appointments and stuff like that. But the person themselves, if it's a $5,000 condo or $50,000 condo or a $50 million house, they're going to still get the same amount of love that I would get everybody else, because I don't really care what's in their bank account. I just want to make sure they get treated well. So that's the
Makes
experience.
sense. That's powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. Also, there's, word of mouth obviously within your industry, right? And
Correct.
there's folks who start at a certain level who continue to ladder up as well. So I'm sure that's worked well for your business as you see your clientele grow. So thanks for sharing that, Peter. Jack, I want to go back to you. And I want to shift the topic. We've been talking a little bit about the Asian American identity. You being an activist, though, I'm sure you also intersect with a lot of different races, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about that? Like how has that been as you've been an activist? Like, have you started to connect with other activists, across other communities? What's the support system like there? What have you learned? Would just love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, when I started the Asian hate rallies, a lot of the African American activists would come and show support, and then they would invite me to their rallies and their gatherings and invite me to speak. And it was very nice. Sometimes as an Asian, I'm like, I'm just going to stand in the back. You guys do your thing. And my friend was like, no, you're going to stand in the front and walk with us and march with us in the front to show solidarity. And it's like, oh, wow, like that's amazing. When the Afghans were rallying against terrorism, they asked me how to organize the rally. And there was just these bunch of college kids that came together, organized a massive rally in Fifth Avenue, close to, I think, the library on 40th Street. And it was very impressive. I was the only Asian American, who looked like me to speak at that rally, at that event. And I also kind of go to a lot of retreats and gatherings and group communities, and I meet other activists there. And I talk to them. I build with them. For example, I met this man named Rudy Lockman. He's a Israeli activist, and I got to know his community and what they suffer and the similarities. And it's just important to meet these people because it's a really unique situation. They know so much about their community. They know the solutions. And then as the more you talk to everyone, the more you realize that everyone has the same issues and everyone is the same. We're all the same, trying to fight for our people. And end of the day, we're all people, right? Going through things. So it's a very, very beautiful experience. And it's just very nice to hear about how they find solving their problems.
Totally.
And it's very similar to how I think about solving Asian American problems.
That's great. Yeah, that started happening to me as well as I was writing about my experiences on LinkedIn. Sometimes people shyly would reach out and say, hey, I'm not Asian, but I've come across the same issues, or I'd love to support you, or I'm a white male and I still really resonate with what you're trying to do with workplace inclusion. So appreciate you sharing all that. How about you, Michelle, within kind of your role? Have you kind of found strong allies, and how do they show up for you? The non-Asians who have been very supportive for you in your career.
Yeah, they've absolutely been supportive. I think also just by accident that there are not many Asians in my field, particularly in the sales perspective. But I do think it's something that we do with NYC FinTech Women too, is that we actually have to make it very clear that our membership is inclusive of everybody. So men, or those who don't identify as women. And that's something that we just have to very clearly state and work out, because otherwise people are like, oh, am I allowed to join? Am I allowed to come to an event? Am I allowed to have this conversation? I think that's more maybe a gender issue or thing. And so we do invite a lot of men. So the 12,000 members that we do have include, it's not high, but we think we have about 20% who are male, and we need to have the conversation with males in order to push that forward. I think same thing in terms of kind of the non-Asian Americans that I do work with, is really relying on them and making it also sharing my perspective with them from an Asian American, and make it known that it's from an Asian American perspective. Because if you don't say it, sometimes that's forgotten, and it has to be in the right context, of course. And I do say that a lot as we're thinking about, kind of visibility. A lot of what I do right now is I do a lot of speaking engagements for the retirement community. And when I say retirement, this is 401ks, pension plans. So I do a lot of speaking engagements for financial services. And it's like, hey, we need to think about who do we want to make sure is represented on that stage so people can see that there's representation across the board. We have great people to pick from our organization, but let's make sure that we think about the diversity of who we showcase, and diversity of who we showcase on blogs, and diversity of who we showcase on articles, and getting them in articles, like different media access too. And so getting support from the non-Asians to actually do that and be very intentional about that has been really important. And it's something that, we need to continue just to call out.
Totally. Yeah, we can't amplify everything on our own, right?
Mhm.
And I've gotten used to being later in my career saying, hey, as an Asian American man, this is how I perceive that particular work situation. And it's not a bad thing, right? Like when I
Yeah.
was 25, I would be very afraid to say that because of backlash. But I think we should kind of normalize that kind of behavior because the way we perceive the world is very different based off of each of our upbringings.
And I think we're also benefited from the fact that, look, there's a lot of focus on DEI.
Yep.
There's a lot of focus on ensuring that there is more diversity in the workplace. So let's lean into it. Let's make sure that we optimize that as much as possible. Particularly, in the last couple of years where there's been like a hyper focus. And I think there's been some changes and trends in terms of that focus on DEI, but if we continue to bring it up and make it forefront, then we're just really helping to continue that conversation.
Yeah, it's that ripple effect, like you and Jack were saying, right? Okay, awesome. Well, we're hitting the 40-minute mark. I'd love to. Eric's been very active in the chat, which I love. So maybe he has a question. But before we wrap up my portion of this, would love to just turn it over to each of you, starting with Peter Liu, around what is a goal for you this year that you'd like to accomplish? It could be related to your community, yourself. Just curious what you have so that we could support you potentially. I don't know that I could buy a $10 million mansion, Peter, but maybe there's some other way we could help each other out here.
So, I mean, always personal goal, right? And I don't know anybody can help that, but that's just family, right? So, within my life, it's God, family, then business first. So one of the main goals that I'm trying to do this year is actually in 2 days, we're going to lock in land to help my church buy a land for the church. And it'll take a couple of years to grow that. So that's one of the goals, is to make sure we secure that land for the church and then grow it out and build the funds for that church to grow within next year. But it's just spending more time with my family, man. That's one of the hardest things. Like my oldest is 6 years old, or not 6 years old, 9 years old. And I started 10 years ago, pretty much the year he was born. I missed the first 6 years of his life because I hustled so hard. So that's my goal, right? Is to get my team to a certain point where I can spend more time with my family and kids. And actually, we're going to be going to Europe next week for 3 weeks.
Oh, great.
So, it's a Mediterranean cruise, but we go into Barcelona and then the cruise and then fly out of Rome. So that's my goals.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so hard for parents, right? Because, I could tell you have a very good work ethic and it's hard to turn off, especially when we're like tied to our mobile phones. I have a 5-year-old. I feel similarly, I feel like time's moving really quickly, but it's also hard to detach yourself from work, and we intentionally need to do it. So appreciate you sharing that. Jack, how about you? What's a goal that you have for this year?
Yeah. I am trying to normalize the conversation around mental health and depression amongst Asian Americans. If you don't know, suicide is the leading cause of death for young Asian American adults. It is the only case for any ethnic group. A lot of people don't know how to talk about it. I've personally lost 3 friends who are in their 30s in the last 2 years to suicide. And
sorry to hear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I've been grieving, and finally feel like now I'm in a position to talk about it, because I feel like I am a very strong figure. I am the 6'2" guy in our community. I am the athlete. I am the jock. I am the 7-figure entrepreneur. So if I don't talk about it, then who's going to talk about it? So creating spaces I'm looking at a 4,500 square foot wellness center here in New York that I'm trying to get. I've been in negotiations with, and taking people on retreats and teaching them the Asian values and the Asian kind of culture, the Taoist techniques, the Qigongs, and bringing them back to the roots, because that's kind of who we were, right? We lost that in the Cultural Revolution, or when people left to focus on capitalism. It makes a lot of sense, but I think sometimes with so much pressure to succeed and do well, we forget the most important things, which is family, which is working on the self, which is cultivating the self, the connection to nature. And I think that really manifests in a lot of destruction when we forget about those core innate values that we all kind of grew up with and is a part of us, and it's a part of our history.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I think it's so important. And thanks for sharing that. I actually lost a younger sister to suicide in 2007. And I'm still grieving, right? Not a day goes by when I don't think about the trauma, but also the community doesn't make space for the discussion, right?
Yeah.
It's very taboo. So appreciate you creating that space and really focusing on it so that the next generation can normalize talking through things before it gets to that ultimate, state. So appreciate you saying all of that. Michelle, how about you? What's a goal of yours this year?
So a very specific goal I have this year that's coming very soon is the launch of a podcast called Her Name Is. So it's focused on Asian American female leaders and founders. So we have some great women who are sharing their story. And the reason why we're calling it Her Name Is that because there's a lot of story behind someone's name, especially as an Asian. If you're, a first gen, or if you've immigrated over, and really starting with the name and then going deeper into their story of their family, their culture, and how it's had an impact into their career. So we have some great women from, Jane Tran at Sixfold to Joy Fan at retail, and a lot of amazing women who are going to showcase. So we're launching that under the umbrella of Tiger Collective this year. So for me, I think the goal is to really get a much deeper into showcasing and amplifying Asian female leaders. A lot of work that I'm also doing within women in fintech that continues. And those are my passion projects. And I think, I'll say, my kids are my passion project too, because they definitely take a lot of time and space in my mind. But making space for all of that in a really kind of, I hate to say the word balance because it's not necessarily balanced, but in a way that, making sure that prioritizes all these different efforts between kids and passion projects alongside. So follow Her Name Is when it launches in the next month.
Amazing. We'll definitely follow. Yeah. And thanks for sharing that, Michelle. So we have a question from Eric. I guess I called him out to ask one. I'm going to read it right here real quick, and would love all the panelists to answer. So thank you, Eric, for joining. So his question is, how do we measure success? What's the goal? Is it like more board representation, and how do we get there? That's a very big question to answer, but let's go lightning round around the horn. Peter, let's start with you. How do we actually start measuring success of the Asian community as we go forward this year?
Well, for my team, it's just beat Peter Liu's team last year. That's how I measure success. I mean, people always ask what's our competition, right? It's to beat ourselves. So as long as we're progressing forward, I think that's the best way to measure success.
I love that. Yeah, you can't worry too much about the competition, right? You just have to improve on yourself. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, success to me is how many people I impact, how many lives do I change in the next day, year, and the depth of the impact. I think also a separate topic is when people look at things, they look at return on investment, which is a great tool. But I look at return on fulfillment, like how fulfilled am I going to be when I do an exercise, when I do help people, and that keeps me spiritually rich.
I love that. Yeah, it's not the number of people. It's even if you could change one or two lives, that's huge impact, right?
Yeah.
And again, I know I keep using the ripple effect. I like that visual of being able to just continue to impact over a period of time.
Right.
Michelle, how about you? What do you think about measuring success?
Yeah, so I think a little bit broader, and I will go to numbers for this one, is seeing the change in the percentage of Asians in executive seats. So leadership teams need to change because that has a huge ripple effect downward. Board representation needs to change. And so we can't have this, kind of this heavy representation within those who are non-executives, but then have such a minuscule representation and real seats that make the decisions. So that's a metric that I'd love to change very specifically across all Asian Americans, right? I'm sure if we get down to like Asian American females in executive seats, it goes way down. But like that's a very specific number that I'd like to take a harder look at to say, okay, how do we change that number? And then that would be a success for me.
Yep. Yeah, I think I read something. I'm going to post a stat later too on my LinkedIn profile that actually between 2014 and 2022, we've had a reduction in executive representation at the Asian representation at the executive level. So something like a decrease in 11%, which is not good. It's horrendous, right? Because the percentage was already quite low. So I agree. I'd love to see some of the hard numbers change. And it starts with, I think, normalizing not only how we talk about our identity, but also the changing definitions of executive presence. It's not always the in-your-face tall dude. It can be the intentional, quiet person who like speaks before they talk, right? Which is also something
There's
I'm
an
very passionate
interesting
about.
AI-generated CEO. I don't know if you guys saw that. The AI-generated CEO was named John in like a certain way. So,
Of course.
So
Awesome.
I
Yeah.
got a question for Jack. So
Go for it, Peter.
So what was the stats that you said that the Asian American was suicide, Jack? What was the number?
Yeah. So the stat is suicide is the leading cause of death for Asian American adults under 30, and it accounts for 1 out of 3 deaths. 75% of them being men.
So what do you think is the Asian parent pressure? Because I would tell you guys, I'm going to share with you guys. My first year in real estate was 10 years ago, 2014. I sold 2 houses. I just got married, bought a house, found out I was going to have a son. June, July 2014. I only sold 1 house. I felt like the biggest failure in the world and almost committed suicide myself.
Wow.
I was very close to doing. I had $1 million life insurance policy on me that I thought that my wife and unborn child was going to be better off without me. So I'm wondering, is it the Asian parent pressure that we are always supposed to be perfect? Are we always supposed to not make a mistake and fail? Because I was there, you guys. So this is something that hit me today when you said it, Jack, because I want to be a part of that. I really want to be a part of this.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and I felt that too. It's actually 10% of Asians are feeling that on an annual basis of some sort of depression, anxiety, or suicide. I remember when my mom had anxiety, she said, "I have the crazy disease." And I'm like, "Mom, that's not crazy. That's, a significant amount of Americans have felt that in the past." If you look at a chart by Richard Dawkins, I think he wrote the Gene Key or something like that. I forgot the name of the book. He shows shame as the lowest frequency. And that is a thing that we typically feel in the Asian American experience or Asian experience overall, is shame, because the comparison of you're not good enough or you did something wrong is so destructive, and it's at the lowest you can feel. There's a difference between guilt and shame, right? Like shame is like deep inside. Guilt is kind of outside. It's like, oh, guilty of that. But shame is like in our core level. It's kind of in our identity. So that's kind of what happens. So the key is not to shame people for like their mistakes or compare people to others because they just never feel good enough. It's like you're good enough because you are good enough. It's like you have nothing to prove. You have nothing. You don't need to be anything besides yourself. But everyone, especially in our society, is trying to adapt to be someone else, mostly like taught by a white system, right? To adapt in a white system. But it's like if you don't try to adapt in this white system and you speak the way that you want to speak and you dress and you communicate that how you are and how you feel, then you're living at least at your truth. And authenticity is the highest frequency in this chart. It's even higher than love.
Yep.
So living from an authentic place is not very easy as Asian people.
Yeah, completely agree. I also think, Peter, like we don't see a lot of Asian men talk about mental health in public or private settings,
Yeah.
right? Like I rarely talk to my Asian friends about how I'm feeling truly, right? And I think vulnerability is seen as a weakness versus a strength. And I think that's why I love, Jack, what you're doing. And Peter, thanks for sharing that as well. We've all been through such low lows, and you just never know based off of what everything out in social media is saying. And so building communities and normalizing that discussion, I think, is huge. It's an uphill battle, but has to start, even with like the three of us here who are Asian males.
Yeah.
Like
Well, really,
stats is one of us, right?
yeah, you're right.
If
Yeah,
you think
it's
about
scary
that
to think. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And yeah, and I'm glad that didn't happen to you, Peter, and that you're like thriving now, which is also an important thing for people to look at. Well, I really appreciate everybody, Michelle, Eric, Freddie, for listening in here. This was an amazingly rich conversation. Took turns that I didn't even think it would take. So thank you, Michelle, Jack, and Peter for joining and really being engaged. I know an hour of your time is so much and so valuable. So I appreciate it. People who are listening to this will appreciate it. And thank you so much for kicking off this series. Really looking forward to continuing this. The plan right now is to do this monthly with different Asian American leaders. And like Michelle was saying, we just need to see more of this so that we could start impacting the next generation. So with that, I think we'll call this. Thank you again, everyone. See all the comments here. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Michelle. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Jack.
Yep. Bye-bye, guys.